And this give a knowledge management and continuous feedback, either feed forward from material variability to the process or a feedback from process parameter to the process for real-time adjustment. And as long as the main risk is the patient, so it's very important to implement quality risk management principles and quality risk management process. And we will not go deep in the process flow chart of the quality risk management, which is included in the Q9 of the ICH, with the main blocks of risk assessment, risk control, and risk revision. But you need to identify and evaluate each risk. And there are considered risks due to lack of process understanding, especially in stage 1, when you are still developing your process and developing the formulation, developing your testing strategy and analytics. Due to the lack of control of the relationship between process inputs and parameters and product attributes. And that's why implementing a factorial analysis to define and determine the allowed variation and their impact on the critical quality attributes is a very important control measure to minimize this risk. There is also risk of sampling uncertainty. It depends on the pattern of distribution. It depends on the uniformity of the intermediate in each stage. So the amount and the quantity and method of sampling should be based on understanding of the process and the activity and the variability pattern with it to ensure that sampling is representative. Risk of scale difference when we are scaling up the process and moving it from the lab scale to the commercial scale. And normal operating variability and the risk of impacting with this variation the critical quality attributes. And finally, even after establishing a well and controlled process, there is still a risk of a change in the process or measurement behavior along the production. So all these risks should be considered in the quality risk management plan, and we should set controls measure that prevent this risk from impacting the overall quality of the product and impacting the patient. Hence, the relationship of every critical process parameter and every critical material attributes and all variation sources should be established to the product quality and the patient risk. And variability range, those have significant impact on the critical quality attributes should be defined. Those have a negligible effect on the critical quality attributes also should be defined. Another consideration is that these variations are currently monitored and controlled within a separate system. So if we have a monitoring system of the variation in another system, this gives a higher confidence and minimize the risk. Does the in-process control have a special characteristics? All these considerations should be implemented while we are making the design phase and while we are establishing the initial control strategy. And this control strategy itself should have a periodic review and reporting based on the risk. So if the process is well known and we have a very good understanding and we have a similar process and we have a previous knowledge about the capability of the process, this minimizes the risk and this may reduce the frequency of periodic reporting or periodic revision of the control strategy and the continuous process verification plan. So the frequency is based on the capability and the volume of data and the amount of knowledge gained. Yet it should be more frequent than annually. And when we are implementing the quality risk management, the two main principles of quality risk management should be implemented. Those are that the evaluation of the risk to product quality should be based on scientific knowledge and ultimately linked to the protection of the patient. So if the critical quality attribute is having a high risk and this variation source have a high impact, so this risk should be based on scientific knowledge and based on data. And the second principle, that the level of effort and formality and documentation of the quality risk management process should commensurate with the level of the risk. So if the risk is high and it's significantly impacting the patient safety, so we need to have a very formal approach of the risk assessment. And so we need to have a thorough documentation of the risk assessment conducted. Yet, if the risk is minimal or negligible, the level of effort and formality will be very small. Along the quality risk management, we can use quality risk management tools. And there are various tools. Some examples are included in this slide, but this is not an exhaustive list. And there are others tools, but in the industry, those are the commonly used tools that fit the process validation. Yet everyone performing the quality risk management can select the tool which is appropriate to the assessment, and it is the responsibility of the manufacturer to justify the tool selection and the methodology. And these quality risk management tools are used in various stages of the process validation. It could be used in stage 1, it could be used in stage 2B or 3A or 3B. One of the most commonly used is failure mode effect analysis, FMEA, and the failure mode effect criticality analysis, FEMICA. In this, we divide a very complex process into different steps and different activity, and we start to see what are the risks and what are the hazards that may happen in every step and every activity, and check its severity and likelihood, and then give a risk priority number to prioritize the actions and set control measures for risky steps. It is the most commonly used tool in the process validation. Another tool is the fault tree analysis, or FTA, which starts with a fault mode, and then check what are the causal factors for this faulty mode. So it goes from the end to the start. For example, if we have a contamination, what will be the main causes of contamination? It may be due to the environment, it may be due to the operator, and so on. Another tool is the preliminary hazard analysis. And this tool is commonly used when there is a low understanding of the process and very few amount of information is available, and it's highly dependent on a subject matter expert inputs. Hazard analysis and critical control points, and risk ranking and filtering, RFF, which is used for prioritizing the risks and whether accepting it or not accepting it. So the key here is that you select the best tool for your process, for its level of complexity, for the level of variability and justify your selection with data. While we are performing and formulating the control strategy, one of the important steps is determining what are those material attributes and process parameters. Those are critical. And here is an example of a decision tree. How can we define these material attributes and process parameters if they are critical or not critical? So the first is the decision. Can the critical quality attributes be impacted by the formulation and process variables? Is this attribute or parameter can significantly impact the critical quality attributes? If no, so it's a low risk. If yes, and this material attribute and process parameter having significant impact, so it's critical, we will go to check the likelihood. So is the variable shown to be or likely to be practically significant? If yes, it's significant and the variation is significant, so it's a high risk. And the gray area remains if it's not likely to be practically significant. So we need to check the detectability. Does the study's range capture intended variability? If yes, so it's a medium risk. If the detection is low, then it is high risk. And as we mentioned, the level of effort, the level of formality is relevant to the level of the risk. So as the risk increases, the control increases and the formality of the assessment should increase. Finally, while we are establishing the initial control strategy, we should establish the specification and the acceptance criteria. And specification is a list of test references to analytical procedure and acceptance criteria to which an active pharmaceutical ingredient or finished pharmaceutical product should conform. And this specification actually goes in different terms. There is the marketing authorization limit, which reflects the product specification that should be met during the shelf life of the product. And there is the batch release limit that manufacturers should establish to ensure that the critical quality attributes, those are liable to change during the shelf life of the product, will remain within a specification till the end of the shelf life. And finally, the limits established based on the current process performance, which is the calculated upper control and lower control limits, or what is called the validation limits. And there is the acceptance criteria, those shall be defined. Those are the conditions, whether numerical limits, ranges, or other criteria that a product must satisfy to be accepted. These criteria define the boundaries of different parameters. By defining the acceptance criteria, by defining every variation source, the criticality of every variation source, and the design space with the normal operating ranges, those will be acceptable. We come up with the initial control strategy, and now we need to assess, is this control strategy is